I have explained before, including just a while ago, that there really is no reason for elaborate conspiracy theories for what's going on in Washington, D.C. Overwhelmingly, it's a lot of hubristic, arrogant people who can't admit they've screwed up. They don't have the humility to admit they were wrong about things. They are convinced of their own expertise when they're outside their wheelhouse. A buddy of mine points out in a message to me that it's also the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy was the resistance to Trump, and now they're gone full bore with the Biden agenda. They are secure in their jobs. They're not going to get fired. They're convinced of their righteousness and their rightness, and they're moving forward. The problem with everything, including this, with what's going on with the Biden administration and the Democrats, and even to some degree the Republicans right now, are the basics. Getting the basics right and getting the basics wrong. If you can get the basics right, then other stuff will follow. I am an Apple fan. I like Apple. Apple Computer, I still call them, even though now they're Apple Inc. Every few years, after release after release after release after release, Apple's operating system software for the iPhone, for the Mac, it gets very buggy. And typically what they do is they hit pause. And they do a release that fixes all the bugs. And they don't do a lot of new stuff. It makes the computer more efficient. Now, they tried that a couple of years ago, but they, again, it's Apple. They've gotten hubristic as well. And they released an update purportedly that basically it was small ball, fixed bugs, didn't do a lot of new stuff, and in fact tried to do a lot of new stuff and screwed it up further. And they need now, again, to hit pause and just fix the basics. You got to get the basics right. You can't go big or go home, because you're going to go home if you don't get the basics right. And understanding that the basics, the fundamentals, if you don't get it right, people lose trust in you. I think a winning presidential campaign could be someone who campaigns and says, listen, we don't even deliver the mail right these days. We can't engage in the big stuff because the small stuff we're screwing up. And we need to commit ourselves to not doing a bunch of new stuff, but fixing the small stuff. And once we fix the small stuff and restored trust in the small stuff, then we'll start doing the big stuff. But nobody wants to do that these days. Everybody wants to be the visionary leader who does the great big things, the big things. But it's the small things that matter too. The small things over time have a way of adding up to be the big things. And there's a perfect example of this in Puerto Rico. Mark Caputo is the reporter for NBC News. Let me read you part of this. President Joe Biden's top allies in Puerto Rico are growing alarmed that the White House is creating a rift with the island's governor by snubbing his recommendations for 3 federal court vacancies. The controversy, fraught with political consequences for Puerto Rican-heavy states like Florida and New York, began to surface last week amid rumblings on the island that a bipartisan consensus pick promoted by Governor Pedro Pierluisi, a Democrat, Republican Commissioner Jennifer Gonzalez Cullen, a Republican, and Democratic Representative Darren Soto of Florida might never be interviewed or considered for federal judgeships in the territory. At the same time, word leaked that the White House is vetting another candidate who's not supported by any of Puerto Rico's political leaders and who, opponents said, has expressed pro-independent sympathies in the past. And that's a no-go for the governor, the resident commissioner, and the Democratic congressman from Florida who represents Puerto Rican heavy district, all of whom are pro-statehood politicians. Rios, the secretary of the island's pro-statehood party, added that the governor and others were already irked with Biden for failing to champion Puerto Rican statehood as president despite his past support. Now, you should know Puerto Rico it's not typical. And Republicans actually do get elected there, as do Democrats. For a long time, Puerto Rico had a Republican leader. It is a territory of the United States. It is divided between independence and statehood. It's kind of got a sweet gig right now, and where it's got some benefits by being part of the United States without actually having to be a state. But this is small ball stuff. You have the Republican, or you've got the Democratic governor, a Republican commissioner, you got a Democratic congressman who represents a Puerto Rican heavy district in Florida, where a lot of people left Puerto Rico after that big hurricane several years ago and are now in Florida. They all want a particular person to be a federal judge. And the Biden team isn't giving that person a hearing. Now, I know a little bit about this because I helped a friend of mine navigate his way into a federal judgeship. And there is a lot of glad handing, but it begins with a basic level of if the president is of the same party as the elected members of Congress, the elected members of Congress tend to recommend to the president the person they would prefer. And that person tends to be someone who's done all the right things politically over time, has made the right donations and supported the right people, is a lawyer, is a judge, has a good background, is not a controversial person, will not cause embarrassment, and will be an ideologically good fit for the area. If the people in charge of the state, the congressmen, particularly the senators, though, the senators are of the different party for the president, they tend to not have as much say, but can certainly put a hold on the person and say, this person is absolutely hell no, unacceptable, we won't let them. And the president tends to listen, even if the president's of an opposite party. In California, for example, the Republicans obviously had no say when Trump or Bush were president because it was such a lockstep Democratic control. But the Republicans agreed what we will do is here's our list and you veto, Democrats, the absolutely unacceptable people. Trump finally said screw it because they were vetoing everybody and Trump just started putting his own people on. But this is the basics. This is politics. It's not even politics 101. This is high school politics. It's not collegiate level politics. You get the basics right. You listen to the people who brought you to the dance. And these Democratic politicians in Puerto Rico who want statehood, they want someone that they like to be judge. And now they've gone public. Now they are putting pressure on the White House. So much so that White House spokesman Andrew Bates is saying, no, the process is early. No decision's been made for any of the 3 open spots in the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico. Damage control preemptively. The reason they went to the press and leaked this story is not to shake it up, but to get it out there and bypass the handlers at the White House so everybody in Washington knows that they're being ignored. These are the basics. Having a competent American military is one of the basics. Having a military that can do its functions properly. And what are its functions? To defend the United States. It's rather necessary. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, to ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. Our common defense is the appropriate realm of the American Pentagon, the Defense Department, the National Guard, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Space Guard, you name it. Getting them into diversity training to understand critical theory really isn't a big deal. And yet, this administration isn't focused on the basics. They're focused on nonsense. When you can't get the basics right, when you can't keep the economy going, when you can't secure the border, when you can't even pick the judges that your base wants you to pick, you've screwed up royally. Now, here's the thing. Let's say Joe Biden is completely out to lunch. Let's say Joe Biden is a blithering, moronic, Alzheimer's patient idiot who doesn't leave the room, is fed through a straw, and they prop him up like Weekend at Bernie's for him to do press conferences. Let's just say that's the case. He's surrounded with people who should be able to get the basics right, and they can't. And those people are going to cost themselves everything by not being able to do it. Now, let's say Joe Biden actually does call the shots. They may be guarded. He may only have 3 hours of sanity a day, but in those 3 hours, Ron Klain prepares a package of proposals for him that Ron Klain likes, the prime minister likes, and he's got to get the king to sign off on them. There should still be the basics, and those basics should still have some outcomes of sanity, and they're not. This is a problem. When you get the basics wrong, everything else breaks down. So this story seems like somewhat of a throwaway story out of Puerto Rico. That these three people, powerful people in Puerto Rico, and a member of Congress from Florida who has clout within the Democratic Party, who represents Puerto Ricans, want particular people picked to be district judges. It's the way the system has always worked. It's the way the system will always work, but it's not working here. This story is diagnostic of a larger problem with all the issues that Joe Biden is facing right now. His administration can't get the basics right. And even if, as some of you think, Joe Biden is completely out of it, the people who are in charge of the White House can't get the basics right. Now, why? Why can't they? This is the damning thing. Whether you're talking about the bureaucracy or you're talking about the appointed people inside the White House, they are progressive true believers. And they want the country to go in a certain direction where the country itself is resistant. And so they're not worried about the basics. They're worried about the fundamental transformation. But the public will not go along with the fundamental transformation if they can't get the basics right. And in pushing the fundamental transformation of the country the way they're pushing it, they're going to cause a public backlash that causes them not just to lose Congress, but causes them to lose at the state level as well, where there will be extraordinary pushback with a judiciary that is now conservative that issues injunctions. These people are such true believers. They don't really understand the way the systems are designed to work. And however much people vent about the systems and the Constitution and the procedures and the gridlock is a feature, not a bug of the system. They seem to have forgotten all of this. And because they can't get the basics right, because they can't get the basics on the post office right, they can't get the basics on picking judges right, they can't get the basics on securing compromise deals right, they can't get the basics on the military right. The public is going to find people who can. And here is what the Democrats have to worry about. When the Republicans take back Congress, which they more likely than not will because of stuff like this, the very rudimentary basic fundamentals of politics being violated by the Democrats because they can't get those basics right, the Republicans will take back Congress, and suddenly, guess who gets to hold the investigative hearings? Guess who gets to set the agenda? Guess who gets to set the legislative track? Guess who gets to haul the members of the cabinet up for questioning? Guess who gets to investigate these sorts of things? It's no longer the Democrats in charge of the agenda. And good, because this president and the Democrats and the progressives in the bureaucracy, they have forgotten how to do the very basic things, in large part because of their arrogance, and the Republicans will take back power and appropriately humble them.